Before we begin our work today, let's revisit the compelling why from day one. Think about a time in your life when you stopped caring about math. Why did that happen to you? Quick write or share out with a shoe buddy or a clothes buddy, whatever color matches, with why you stopped caring about math. I will share my moment of when I stopped caring about math. I was in I think I was in the 9th grade, going into 10th grade, definitely in high school math, and we all know, dun dun dun, what happens in 9th grade, algebra, right? Yeah. So, whenever I was in 9th grade, we had our teacher go on maternity leave, and I had 4 substitute teachers, which, you're thinking to yourself, wow, that's a lot. And you couple that with kind of a hard to manage classroom dynamic in terms of student makeup. There's no wonder why we had 4 subs. Long story short, what was important about that is I came from a working class family. Some may or may not say that we were kind of poor, not necessarily poverty, but definitely working class. And if I wanted to improve my situation, I knew from early on I needed to get a scholarship, be that academic or athletic, in order to get myself to college and have a better life. So algebra hit me like a ton of bricks, and I had a good friend who helped me get through it. And I would probably say I faked it till I made it, but I didn't do well in the class. I never really learned algebra. Doesn't sound too big of a deal until you start to think about those college scholarships and how that might impact AP math courses the next year. It was trigonometry, and that kind of sort of has some links to algebra. So I get a scholarship, teaching fellow scholarship, and I go to NC State, and I decided I wanted a plan B in case being a school psychologist didn't work out for me, or being a teaching fellow didn't work out for me for some reason. So my plan B was to be a genetic counselor. And in that coursework is a requirement to pass organic chemistry. And if you know anything at all about organic chemistry, it's about balancing equations. Well, algebra came back to bite me again. I never really learned those basic skills and how that applied to other things, and I was unable to pass organic chemistry. And I retook it with a tutor and still was unable to pass, and I dropped my genetic minor my junior year of college at NC State. And fast forward to when I was about 30 years old, I took math foundations, and Val Faulkner was one of the professors that was working through the coursework there. And there's a day where you work on learning how to balance equations. And in about 5 minutes, I learned how to balance an equation. I did the task, and Val came over to me and said, "Heather, you did it." And I looked at her with tears in my eyes and said, "Yep, I did." And she said, "What's going on? You did it." I said, "I know. This is the reason why I didn't pass organic chemistry." Needless to say, really what resulted in me not liking math was a lack of instruction, right? A lack of core instruction in a very pivotal time in my life where I really needed to learn algebra. And it came back spiraling around many times in my life to where that had become my compelling why. So part of what we're here to talk about today is to understand your data from the number knowledge test in the framework of what we call in Wake County multi-tiered systems of support, or you may have heard it called MTSS. You could have also heard something called RTI, response to intervention, or some derivative of the two, right? So we're not renaming or redoing this work. We're adopting a national model which is why we went with multi-tiered systems of support. So this here is our moniker from the district, and if you were in the training, we would have talked about what things you notice about the moniker. So just take a moment to study the moniker and think about the different things that you might see. So you might notice that in the center of the triangle is something called Team Initiated Problem Solving. That stands for TIPS, which is the problem solving model we've adopted in the district. You may also notice Effective Teaching Framework at the bottom. That is best practices of core instruction, and may or may not at this time heard about that from your administration. Then, what most people see right off is the different colors in the middle of the triangle, going from green, which is what we view to be core instruction, into yellow, which we view as strategic, or Tier 2, and red, which we view as intensive, or Tier 3. So MTSS is now a part of the achievement policy in Wake County schools. And just a quick update, the last time we did a new achievement policy in Wake County was about 30 years ago in 1978, or wow, more than 30 years ago, huh? So it's been a long time, and we consider this work very important to the degree that it's now become policy. When we talk about MTSS, it's just good first teaching for all students. It's not a program, it's about first delivery of instruction and making that the best that you can. It's instruction for the highly able and those who are also at risk. It's not just for students at risk, right? It's for all children, even children who need enrichment. We also have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is we have a lot of children that are over-identified in special ed, especially our children that have brown skin. And we have to work on serving those populations better. We have to look at our return on investment. What resources do we have in our district and our building where we can get a bigger bang for our instructional buck? We're not going to get more money, so we have to use what we have wisely. And ultimately, we want to make sure that we're maximizing the learning for all children to improve achievement rates of all subgroups. When we do this work, there are two basic questions. Not easy questions, but questions we must ask ourselves. Are we happy with our data for all students? So take a minute. Are we as a district, are you as a grade level, or you as a teacher happy with your data for all of your students? And is every classroom one you would put your own flesh and blood? This is your niece, your nephew, your daughter, your son, your grandchild. Would every classroom be one that you would feel comfortable sending your flesh and blood to every single day so that they could get optimal learning? Typically, you're not going to get 100% yes to both of these questions. So we need to bring our best selves to the table as educators. We need to have problem-solving discussions because the work of MTSS is really hard and messy work. We say this by also saying every system is aligned for the results that it gets. The systems we speak of could be your classroom, the work of your grade level team, the work of our district. Thinking about your classroom instruction, and especially in kindergarten, the results of our data are directly linked to the experiences we provided our students. We see math as a naturally occurring ability. However, research shows that incoming kindergarten students may not have had the prior experiences to build the neuro pathways. So, we have an opportunity to build them. Repeated experiences can help build strong neuro pathways, which is why daily routines are an important part of our math instruction. This is also why we ask for you to provide 20 days of instruction prior to assessing using the number knowledge test for our students, because we didn't want to gather data about whether or not some students attended preschool or had supportive home environment or any type of prior exposure. We wanted it to be about the instruction that each child in your classroom had received so that every child was on a level playing field. I just mentioned the problem-solving process. We talked about that in the moniker as well, and we talked about the words in the very, very middle called Team-Initiated Problem-Solving Process. This is the process we're going to use in the MTSS framework, which is TIPS. The idea of this model in Wake County is that all decision-making around students is done using this model within the 5 steps and making sure that all along the way we're utilizing data collection to make our decisions. You can think of this model as a roundabout. You can get on and off to collect, analyze, and review data at any point in the process. We'll be using this model to review your beginning of the year number knowledge test data in a few moments. This picture may be familiar to you. In the world of RTI and MTSS, we have a triangle, right? So many of you have probably seen this likeness. We have 80% of students in core instruction, 15% in strategic or tier 2. We would expect about 5% of our students in our school's population or classroom or grade level to be in intensive. So, here's another way of looking at the triangle. This is more of a best practice way that we would like to view the information and support systems of MTSS. 80, 15, 5, those aren't just arbitrary numbers. This can be explained about how funds are distributed to school and school personnel. Where you want to put your money in core, right? Because our buildings are not aligned to do any more than 80, 15, and 5. So if you have the majority of your students in tier 2 or tier 3, you'll never have enough resources to support them, especially when we talk about human capital. Schools are staffed along the 80%, right? Which is where we are at core. 80% of our kids proficient. Some schools will say 75 to 80. That's what we want. We want good first teaching has to be of high importance. As students' needs increase, that's where you want to put your resources. We know we have big schools in Wake County. If that was your personal child, what would you do to ensure that they were successful? This is the passion behind figuring out the yeah, but when we talk about needing more people or needing more money, we just need to think about how can we align our resources so that we can get good first teaching and not bust at the seams at our tier 2 and tier 3 when we may not have the resources to support there. So, the elephant in the room. We know that a lot of our schools may have upside down triangles, right? Where 95% of our students are red or yellow, or they're that range, right? Intensive or strategic on the data that we have. And we might only have 5% of kids that are proficient at core instruction. As we discussed in the previous slides, our schools don't have the resources to support 95% of our students being in the red and yellow. Intervention is not your solution. It's good first teaching for every student. It's adapting your core instruction. As you heard in day 1 training, the math team has amended the curriculum to support teaching math in a different way to reach all students using methods that are proven to be foundational strongholds to improve student achievement in math. Bottom line, you can't intervene your way out of good core instruction. This may mean that if your triangle's busting at the seams in tier 2 and tier 3, you'll need to consider factors we'll share later about how core instruction and the curriculum are being delivered and whether or not you and or your grade level may need to look at a foundational shift to adapt your core until you have 80% of your students proficient. If you could just say with me, if this is you, especially with an upside down triangle, you can't intervene your way out of good core instruction. Say that with me. You can't intervene your way out of good core instruction. So what do we mean when we say tier 1 core instruction? Let's talk more about what core is. When we say core math instruction, what do we mean? Turn and talk with a partner. These questions may look very familiar to you. They're some of the basis from the DeFore questions of best practices within PLTs or PLCs. Good core instruction begins with clear goals and measurable responses about proficiency. And when we look at questions number 1 and 2, they want to show us that you have guaranteed and viable core instruction. The philosophy is that all students are tier 1 students, so our goal is always that 100% of students pass benchmark assessments. What students need, however, to pass those benchmark assessments may be different, but we want to make sure that we show effective core by having at least 80% of all students meeting benchmarks. What does it mean to adjust core instruction? We aren't changing the content, but we are changing the approach to the content. When reviewing your data and working through the guiding questions and ISO by Riot answers, these questions are how you adjust core instruction to meet the needs of your students. You can adjust core instruction for all learners at all times. So here's some of the guiding questions that your table worked through. Things that like environment, curriculum, and instruction. And then we used the ISO by Riot matrix to talk about how we could review, interview, observe, and test that these things are happening with fidelity, and also give you options for ideas and things to think about in terms of adapting core instruction. So, we'll keep talking about core instruction, and we need to mention how you measure whether or not 80%, 75 to 80% of students are meeting core instruction benchmarks. And we do that with universal screeners. So universal screeners are used to determine the health of core instruction within classrooms and grade levels, and they're also used to identify which students require intervention to close achievement gaps or enrich their learning. What I would like for you to do at this moment is think back to your school poster and bumper sticker that you made earlier in the morning. And what does core instruction currently look like in your building? Turn and talk.